CATT-20, Season 1, Episode 8. What is sonification?
CATT, Center for Assistive Technology Training Northwest. Okay, good morning, everybody, and welcome to this week's Tech in 20 with CAT Northwest. This week, we are so lucky to have JJ Isaacson from Oregon, who is going to take us on a deep dive on sonification. Up to you, JJ.
Good morning, everyone. Let me share my screen, and then also my co-host Tinger Leslie will put the link to this slide deck most likely in the chat for you for your reference now or in the future, because there's links with resources. Does everybody see that? Let me take a look and see. Yeah, you should see that. Great. What is sonification? Why we're using Desmos, especially with our kids that are Braille readers, blind auditory learners. The big deal of it is that we get to use that graphing calculator and get to listen to graphs, as well as we're going to learn in another session how to emboss them out and tactfully use them. So this is quite a pathway to our kiddos in STEM. It really removes that visual barrier and lets our students explore and understand through sound. And as Ting mentioned, I'm JJ. I am with Northwest Regional ESD Vision Team over here in Oregon. I'm an itinerant teacher. I have a robust caseload. Also am the BVIS, Blind and Vision Impaired Students statewide specialist for math. And so I consult for all things math and numeracy in Oregon. And I have a few Washington folks too. So here we go. Goals for today, we're going to understand what sonification is, learn how to introduce sonification to our students. There's going to be a lot of emphasis on that. And then explore a little bit of Desmos audio trace with JAWS. We're not going to do it. We're just going to see your resources, see how it's done. We've kind of already been doing that. Leslie's been showing that stuff with Eli, and we'll continue to do that. We're going to mainly focus on how we get to the sonification part with our kids. It's everywhere. Sonification's everywhere. I was mentioning to Leslie and Ting when it went ding ding to let us know that people were in the waiting room on Zoom. That's sonification. Your phone, I'm going to hold up my phone to my camera. How much on our phone is bleeps at us and our ears go, oh, we know exactly what that is. That's a message. That's an email. That's a phone call. That's a voicemail somebody meant. That's a notification from one of my favorite apps. That's all sonification. Those familiar alerts on our devices, grocery checkouts, the scanning is sonification, our alarms, medical equipment, parking centers, Geiger counter clicks. We have lots of sonification in our life. With blind and visually impaired tools, we have Desmos, we have Seeing AI, we have O&M, audio navigation apps and games. In this particular instance with Desmos, we're using it to represent data, graphs, movements, and trends. And it gives our kiddos information that's typically visual. Sonification uses non-speech audio to convey information or perceptualize data. There's also a link down here we won't get to today, but if you'd like to, it's an OPB, Oregon Public Broadcasting Think Out Loud, that was just put out, I think, last fall or maybe last spring, on making data more accessible by turning it into sound. It's a really cool thing you could listen to in your leisure time or on your route to some school. Why it matters, our hearing for our kiddos is their primary compensatory sense. It allows independent interpretation of graphs. It's a faster overview of the trends of graphs and tactile graphics. It speeds things up for folks. Instead of having to figure out what's going on, bam, they can listen to it and know what the trend is. It exports their access to graphs and math, science data, maps and spatial information, and real-world STEM tools, especially astronomy. Sonification, super cool. And for our students, it isn't a bonus feature. It's a necessary access point, just like Braille or tactile graphics. When you introduce sonification to a student, you have to remember we're not just going to go, oh, we're going to use our Desmos today and listen to a graph. We have to build them up to that skill so that they can generalize it and go, oh, I know what's going on here. And then I'm going to learn from here how it works. And so we gradually move from that tactile to where we embody it, think about it, and kind of go, okay, I understand that, and maybe I could do it myself, to then finally the digital. And that's how it mirrors how we teach our students to build that spatial reasoning and all sorts of things. So kind of 6 points. We build tactile understanding with the X and Y axis. We use their bodies or the hand movements or their vocal pitch to model those sounds and changes. We explore some simple tactile lines. We transition that to digital graphing and sonification, where the student can then listen and interpret and then draw it themselves if they need to. So they're kind of understanding, did I hear it correctly? And then they create their own graphs of their own data set. So, when students first hear a graph, it can be confusing. But when they feel it, move it, and hear it, that's when they understand and it locks in. This slide is a lot of information, but I wanted to keep it nice and tidy. So it's kind of small. Think about the challenges and struggles as well. As good teachers, we always kind of want to second guess where could there be struggles with it first, or we notice them as they're doing it so that we can scaffold and back up and help them. Pitch height can be a confusion, higher pitch, higher Y value. The left to right panning can be some misinterpretation. They may not yet associate that stereo movement with that x-axis. The rate of change in steepness, that subtle pitch change for different slopes may sound too similar. So they're going to need to take their time there to understand and grasp the differences. Curve symmetry and turning points, there's going to be a minimum, maximum, and parabolas. And sometimes it's hard to hear and pinpoint that sound alone. So they might need extra practice there. Over focusing on their screen reader output while they're trying to listen to the graph. Of course, that's going to be like they got to learn to filter out or do some things there where they can just focus on listening to the graph. And then, of course, remembering cognitive overload in all of this and fatigue, and it can be overwhelming for beginners. So we want to have backups, right? That's not just the only way they access. They can put their hands on it too. And they're also navigating their jaws and having to remember all that. And also confidence barriers. Some students worry that they might be getting it wrong or don't have a musical ear or something. So being aware of where they might struggle and looking out for those things as they go. Low tech listening activities, when you're building up your students, the sooner you can start with them with these things. Perkins has a really cool link to sounds with meaning activity. I'm going to click on that here just to give you a preview of what it looks like. But it's all this, what is sonification? They have samples to listen to. So here's your lesson plan here to start working with kiddos. You don't need to reinvent something. You're identifying rising and falling turns. You can clap, you can tap to do increases and decreases, kind of doing that embodying thing, right? You can do group sound patterns to represent graphs. You can just come up with creative ways. I put this down here on the bottom of the slide. This is the sandbox, right? This is where students need to play before they do the sound analysis. So giving time for that to make it interesting and help build those skills. You can do it by creating tactile XY graphs with the actual paper with them or a graph board or your draftsman and reinforce all those things they need to know about the graph, the origin, the X and Y axis, the up and the down and the left and the right. And then that vocabulary around increasing and decreasing, or it's constant, or it's a curve, or there's going to be steepness sounds. So building that vocabulary, thinking about it, maybe asking them, like, what could it sound like? What would you have it sound like? And using a tactile map of the XY plane before any sonification makes sense. They need to really understand that what they're dealing with that graph. They can raise their voice pitch low to high. You can do that with them. They can trace the line while listening. They can become the line and vocalize the pitch themselves. And do it for straight lines, curves, peaks and valleys, zigzags. You can do it with movements, with their bodies and the sound, and that helps wire that concept into them with spatial memory. This kind of filters over into O&M practices too. You might want to collaborate with your orientation mobility specialist where they could be doing some things with their body and proprioceptive skills and sounds when they're doing their orientation mobility. Then we transition to Desmos. So all of that, now we're transitioning to, okay, let's talk about how we do Desmos and what it does. And this is where the magic happens. The Desmos graph now turns into this pitch, this left and right panning, these pop sounds, speed control for the playback, and we kind of can step through the graph point by point. So we're going to play this little video. It's going to start at about 1:12, I think, and just play till the end, which is about 2.5 minutes or so. But it's really going to help us understand what it sounds like.
Now for some fun. Let's turn on audio trace by pressing Option T. Audio trace on. I can now use the right and left arrows to navigate along the curve while the screen reader calls out the coordinates. Intercept at X 0, Y 1, X 0.2, Y 0.9801, X 0.4, Y 0.9211. Press Tab to jump from one point of interest to another. Intersection at X 1.0141, Y 0.5284, 0 at X pi over 2, y 0, x to the limit x, pi, y minus 1. And finally, press H to trace automatically along the curve. Playing graph. Worth lingering here to call out a few details. First, we trace along the graph from left to right. Next, the tone changes to indicate the vertical position of the graph. When the graph is below the x-axis, we introduce some static into the audio, further helping students establish a sense of the graph's position in the plane. Finally, points of intersection are called out with a delightful little pop. Let's play it again. See if you can hear those 4 audio features. To learn more about our accessibility features, including how to configure the screen reader on your own device, how to activate audio trace, and where to find a comprehensive list of keyboard shortcuts and commands, visit www.desmos.com/accessibility. Now for some fun.
That shows you all those different things that are mentioned in this slide. The pitch, the left or right pan, the pop sounds, that static or hush sound, right? Those are all things, as well as you saw at the beginning. Oh, here we are with the JAWS talking to us, and we're listening for points. And it's still giving us sonification when it goes dink, when it hits that point, too. So these are all things that our brains, for us and our students, we're having to build up our abilities to understand and use sonification to its full potential. Here's the audio trace keyboard commands. We're not going to do those today. I'm not turning on Desmos with you, but there's a Desmos Help Center that you can click on. That link gets you to the audio trace. But you heard them talk about Alt-T, the H, back and forth, left and right arrows. You can adjust your playback speed, and you can go between expressions. Those are just a few of them. But under your Help Center, you'll find the rest. And when you're transitioning to JAWS, when you're going from the graph board to Desmos, this is a cool link that'll help you plan lessons to do that. So you're doing this tactile stuff with them, this graphing board thing or their paper, and now we're going to move it to Desmos, and we're going to kind of use these back and forth with our different JAWS commands and listening skills. And this just kind of reviews, the toggling and the browse mode, the focus mode. JAWS reads your expressions, and you're going to ensure the students can independently navigate it, move to the graph, toggle the auto illustration, adjust their speed. When you do transitions to Desmos, I highly recommend you start with y equals x and y equals x squared. What this is going to do is going to give you a line, and it's going to give you a curve, a parabola, right? And so that's going to be the basics for students to start listening to the pitch, the rise and the falls, the symmetry, the minimums and maximums, and the intersections, those little pop noises. So that'll give them some good practice with those. And they then practice entering equations that they might be working with in math, or that you might provide for them simple equations, and listening to those, have that graph board available or that graph paper, and they need to then put them on, draw them themselves of what they heard, right? And then check it, like emboss it, feel the emboss, and just kind of work through it so their brains can start having those aha moments. Creation is comprehension, right? So we want them creating these in Desmos and also through their own skill with tactile graphing, and then emboss, create the emboss, and then feel that and think about that. You can also do some other creative sonification activities with them that can get pretty fun, where you can sonify different weather data or class surveys. You can compare different musical instruments. There's a link here to Two-Tone. It's an extension, I think, Google. You can work with that. You can compose a data story. You can use I mentioned O&M earlier. You can use the O&M apps to integrate that spatial audio learning. And you can make a sonification scavenger hunt. These are just some creative ideas you can do to work with your kids to build their skills there. This is a big one right here. I started working with some of my science teachers and math teachers that were game, as well as the students, and encourage the groups that your student works with. If they have to do a presentation, they're going to have visuals, of course, right? But let's have them incorporate the sonification into those visuals. So the entire class is experiencing it not only visually, but with the sound as well. Or take it a step further and say, maybe we shouldn't do visuals at all, and we should share with sonification, or we could share with human sonification. We could come up with our own way of telling folks what the group does with our sounds, our voices, is how you're going to interpret the data that we collected. And so they've had some fun with that to really include our student and other learners. I always say we got lots of students in our classes that are visually impaired. The back row is for sure. And if it's middle school, they all are. And then here's resources that I've spoke up throughout the slide deck, but also right here for you. The Perkins School for the Blind, they have a summary page. I'll click on that real quick to show you. This is where I just gather mass information for this when I've done a presentation on it before. Perkins has really laid out tons of resources and a scope and sequence to help you go through to help your students master this skill and this equalizer. Desmos has their lessons that they've worked with through Perkins, the audio trace documentation that I mentioned earlier. And then also we have that two-tone, which is an accessible sonification site, and SAS Graphics Accelerator, which is also another resources. And there's lots of them. You just Google sonification, you're going to find tons of resources. There's things that you can have your students listen to that are pretty advanced. NASA has some really cool stuff. Just a Google search for sonification examples will give you lots. And the closing, remember, sonification builds independence, access, and competence. Desmos allows our students to participate fully in math and STEM, as well as it's a universal design principle for many other learners. And remember to start early, reinforce it often, and integrate it across all the subjects if you can. The main quote I want to leave you with is it's an equalizer. It gives our students full participation in STEM. Start early, reinforce often, and make math something students can hear, feel, and understand. 19 minutes. It's done. All right. Let me unshare and Ting can take this over if we've got some questions or comments or
All right.
additional resources.
Another fabulous Tech in 20. Thank you so much, JJ, for sharing that with us. I know we have shown audio trace in several previous Tech in 20s, and it was really nice for you to just take us on the deep dive and just re-emphasizing that you can't just turn on audio trace. There's a bit of lead up to get students there to really be able to train their ears and to be able to alert to that information. I think my favorite part of that was when you talked about the importance of having the tactiles available to really give that grounding to what the students are hearing. So thank you again, JJ.
The contents of this video were developed through a partnership with the American Printing House of the Blind, APH. CATT-NW is based at the Washington State School for the Blind, WSSB. Logos, WSSB and APH. The contents of this video were developed under a contract authorized by the Department of Education. However, these contents do not necessarily represent the policy of the Department of Education, and you should not assume endorsement by the federal government.